Expertgruppen för biståndsanalys, EBA, är en statlig kommitté som oberoende analyserar och utvärderar svenskt internationellt bistånd för att det ska kunna förbättras och utvecklas. EBA har 10 ledamöter med kompetenser från olika biståndsområden och ett kansli som verkställer besluten. Förutom våra rapporter så ordnar vi seminarier, workshops och möten mellan olika parter. Varje år sammanfattar EBA sin verksamhet i årsberättelsen Biståndsanalys. Den kan beställas från kansliet eller laddas ner på eba.se. EBA har ett oberoende i relation till uppdragsgivaren regeringen, liksom i relation till vad som utvärderas, samt till de rapportförfattare som anlitas. Rapportförfattarna ansvarar själva för slutsatser och rekommendationer i sina studier. Allt vi producerar som rapporter, seminarier och vår podcast EBA-podden finns tillgängligt på vår hemsida.
So most welcome to this EBA seminar, which we have entitled From Conflict to Long-Term Development Cooperation, Lessons Learned from Sweden's Aid to Liberia. My name is Mats Horsmar, I'm Deputy Managing Director at EBA, and you're all most welcome here today. Liberia, as you know, is a small coastal country in West Africa. Very high incidences of poverty, coming out of a civil war a couple of decades ago. Sweden has worked there with development cooperation ever since, and EBA has asked a team led by Christoph Emminghaus at the company's response to evaluate Swedish development cooperation over 20 years to Liberia. So Sweden is one of the larger donors to this country. And given the results of this evaluation, and given Sweden's relative importance in the country, we hope this seminar to be a discussion about what role aid may play and how it ought to be designed in cases like these, where almost everything is needed. Both the social contract, if it ever existed, is very weak, and the state functions and capacities are extremely weak, while your support is influential and important. We have people following us online. You're most welcome. There will be an opportunity to ask questions. Use your Q&A function at the Zoom to ask your questions, and we'll read them out from here. And there will be an opportunity to place questions from you in the room as well. To just discuss this theme, we have a very good group of people here. We have Christoph Emminghaus, who is a team leader and the principal investigation for the evaluation from Response in Berlin. We have Julian Krause, who's also with Response. You will introduce the report. We have a panel with Johan Romare, who will appear on the screen with us in some time. We have Juliana Huss, we have Gun Eriksson Skog, and I'll introduce you more correctly a bit later. But now, first, Christoph and Julian, the floor is yours to introduce the report, please.
So, Mats, thanks a lot for introducing, and thanks a lot for the opportunity to present our report. 20 years ago in Liberia, when Sirleaf was voted as the first female president in Africa at all. There was a saying that's now a textbook-like development, what we can see. And we have now the next 20 minutes maybe to present why we have called our report a long and winding road, and not a textbook development. We are happy to do so, but first of all, we would like to thanks to EBA, especially to Markus, for guiding us through the process, to writing our report, but doing all these processes, also to work with the reference group. Thanks a lot to Helena, who shared the reference group, and thanks to the embassy in Monrovia, to Johan, who is with us today, for all the dialogues we had and to learn how his perspective and the team the team and the teams before, because we looked on 20 years, has been. So We start now, do it together with my dear colleague Julian. It's about 20 minutes, and then we go into a discussion and try to ask everything, to answer everything. So some background maybe on Liberia. Liberia is, Mats told already about, it's one of the 2 countries in Africa who've never been a formal colony, beside of Ethiopia, founded in 1847. Roughly 5 million people live there on a size of it's a small country. It's maybe a quarter of Sweden in size, speaking more than 20 languages, and suffered a civil war, often along ethnic borders, but not only. Between 1989, with a stop in 1997, but it started again quite soon in 1999, and lasted until 2003. So, and we look at the time after this process. These are the 20 years we are in now. There are many challenges. You don't know in development cooperation where to start. So we see a high dependency on foreign aid. One of the lowest GDPs in the world, 754 US dollars per year. On the ranking at the end of the Human Development Index, it's number 178 out of 191 measured countries. So it's a poor country. They have realized recent shocks, COVID, as most of the world, but also Ebola some years before, which destroyed some progress made until then. And it has a poor infrastructure and poor governance. So we talk about it in a minute. It is, to say also some positive things, it's somehow a stable democracy. They realized already twice the change of power. So 2 new male presidents after their leave came in power, and the handover happened. It's always a test for a democracy, whether it's possible, and they succeeded. Anyhow, corruption stays high. It's challenged, seen also by the population. If you look on Swedish development cooperation, you see it's steadily increasing. It started in 2003 as part of a regional strategy, and 2 bilateral strategies followed in the years. And the amount of money spent in development cooperation in ODA went up to more than $40 million US per year, which is more than or around 1% of the GDP of the country. We see that Sweden has chosen, what in the beginning, 3 thematic areas. Over the headline, I would say peace, to secure peace in the country. It's peace and security, it's democracy and human rights, and it's inclusive economic development. And they are still there. Until 2021, where our focus stopped, the 3 areas have been there. In the second phase, peace and security was not an official thematic area, but it was part of democracy and human rights. And I would say it was a good decision to take it again as a own pillar in the strategy starting from 2016. We will talk now on these 3 areas, but we will also talk about more general success factors, but also some hurdles and sustainable challenges for sustainability in Liberia over the years. Julian will now give maybe some information about our task, what we had to analyze, and some more general analysis, and I will come back with the impacts, what we see now after 20 years. Julian.
Thank you, Christoph. So we're standing here today because we're presenting an evaluation. We have looked at, almost 20 years of development cooperation in Liberia, of Swedish development cooperation in Liberia, especially the part that was implemented or managed by CEDA. So we were tasked by the expert group for aid studies to look at this whole portfolio and look at the strategies with 2 key objectives. One was the accountability aspect to really look at, okay, what has happened and what were the results of it? How were the strategies formulated? Were they relevant? Did they make sense in the country? Was the portfolio that emanated from these strategies, was it coherent? And how well did Sweden coordinate within itself, but also with other donors and with the government of Liberia? So that's one aspect of what we're looking at. And then, of course, not just for accountability, but also for learning. So our task was also to really look at Liberia as an example and see what can be learned from these almost 20 years of development cooperation in Liberia for other contexts, but also what can maybe the embassy and CEDA learn for its cooperation with Liberia going forward. So that's what we did. I don't want to talk too much about methodology. We have talked to many people. You will find more details in the report. We spent some time in country as well and looked at a number of external sources as well. That's about it maybe for the methodology. So I want to look at three things first now, before we then look at the actual results of development cooperation, which are, as introduced here, the strategies, and then the portfolio and the coordination. So looking at strategies, and maybe the question, why are strategies important? We looked at, did the strategies set appropriate foci? Did they make sense? Did they have adequate hypotheses of what would work in Sweden and in Liberia, and what could be Sweden's role? Generally, across the three strategies that we looked at, they were all quite broad, they were all quite ambitious, and they all came from this underlying objective of support to peace. So while there were these other two aspects as well, these other two thematic areas, they were all thought to contribute to stability, to peace in Liberia. So in that sense, the three strategies were quite broad, and they were able to respond to the development that Liberia had at the time. It started with post-war reconstruction and really basic services, and then moved more towards state building and long-term development cooperation. They also changed in terms of approach from looking more at UN bodies and UN agencies towards the state, and then later on also civil society. So we see quite a bit of positive flexibility and adaptability of these strategies, and in their breadth, they were also able to give CEDA enough room to also respond to emergent needs. So while the strategies covered multiple years, within these years, CEDA was still able to respond to any changes and to work on multiple levels. And this is something that will come up more often. CEDA was able to work on a local level, on a regional level, and also on a national level, which we found quite important to be able to exert any large-scale changes. At the same time, the breadth of such a strategy comes with challenges, not the least because it means you need to spread your resources. Sweden is one of the largest donors in Liberia, but still $40 million are not that much if you look at the whole country, and lots of different sectors. So we saw that in that part it did not necessarily line with the high ambitions that it had, and that a more focused approach might have been more successful there, which also relates to the high ambitions and the Liberian capacity for absorption of all the aid. Liberia is receiving quite a lot of development assistance, so the government also needs to be able to absorb all of that aid. If we then look at how have these strategies been translated in a portfolio, I think the good news first is they have been translated. That's not true for all strategies of all countries. So CEDA was able to use those strategies and to respect the guidelines and the focus and priority areas, and build a portfolio based on that, which was then still able to shift with the needs of the government. So we see how the strategy shifted, the portfolio also shifted. The financial volume increased, the diversity of actors increased, and the kind of the diversity of sectors and who they worked with, on what levels they worked with, it all kind of increased, which we think is quite important for lasting change. At the same time, and this sounds a bit contradictory, again, the breadth of the strategy also translated into the portfolio, and it led to a somewhat fragmented portfolio in parts. There was overall a very, very high coherence within the portfolio, and we saw lots of projects that were kind of working together in what we've called ecosystems, so different projects that kind of work towards the same goal, maybe from different angles. But in other thematic areas, we also saw more fragmentation, simply because the strategy and the portfolio was so broad. So again, we see kind of the advantages and the disadvantages of having a rather broad strategy and a broad portfolio. Lastly, I want to speak a little bit about donor coordination. And in development cooperation, donor coordination is always important, to be able to have a joint goal among donors, and in the best of cases with the national government, of course. In Liberia, this proved to be quite challenging because the government did not always have the capacity or the willingness to convene donors, to coordinate donors' engagement in Liberia. So, which had different reasons. So one was the capacity, really. They were just not able to do it. The other aspect is, in a country that is very highly dependent on foreign aid, there is, of course, a willingness to kind of accept whatever you can get without kind of choosing and focusing too much. So if you look at kind of the overall donor community, you can see lots of different modalities, different priorities, different interests that led to incoherence over time, or also at the same time, because the government was not able to manage. Sweden, on the other hand, then really used its position to start some donor coordination and to moderate and to manage donor coordination. He had used its position as one of the largest donors, one of the most trusted donors as well in Liberia, and then worked with a so-called cooperating partners group to coordinate with the donors. And that coordination was on a strategic level. It talked about priorities, it talked about what areas to focus on, maybe also approach it, but it also focused on very kind of administrative but also important aspects, such as how high are the per diems for certain activities by different donors, which is important to prevent issues of donor hopping. So in that sense, we really see Sweden as a driving force of donor coordination, which was highly appreciated by many donors. It was not overall, it was not necessarily always everything coordinated. There are examples in the reports where we still see issues with donor coordination, but Sweden really had a high influence there in bringing in as much donor coordination as was possible. That kind of to set the theme now, to look a little bit more into the different results areas.
Yes, I would. This one. Okay. We look into the results areas in the 3 chosen thematic areas: conflict and peace, democracy, and economic development. But before I start with the 3 areas, we see overarching effects in all 3 areas. We see what you heard already, that we have always the question whether how to drive lighthouse projects or important reforms on the national level, on the one hand, and make sure that something is visible and has an effect on local communities. We see in all three areas. We always see that Sweden has promoted projects with a high ambition, really difficult ones, with the effect that it's not sure how soon or whether at all they succeed and have an effect on the local communities again. And we have an issue of sustainability. What to do if there are projects with a lot of investment in, but they need maintenance, they need staff who cares about, they need money, state money, to pay the people who are doing this, whether this is in a well balance. And I can go through all three areas and you'll see it again. First of all, conflict, peace and security. There's no return to national violent conflict. That's a huge success. After 20 years of development cooperation and with this long history of civil war, it's a success that there is no national conflict again. But there are local, regional conflicts. Jana will tell more later on the podium on what happens maybe on the local level. It's not secured that this is sustainable for the next years. So there's still a risk. So we see that Sweden supported some really important reforms in the security sector, but also for the justice system. It became better. So we have now regional security posts. Not everything is located in Monrovia. Even the infrastructure was built, some partly financed through Sweden, but we don't know whether the people who had to work there are still there and paid. We see also successful reforms, and that's when we always see, oh, something is happening and it looks sustainable. It's when the national and the local level comes together. We see it on the justice reform, where there was work also with local communities on how to bring formal and informal justice together. And we see this as really successful projects, and we got also the response from beneficiaries that this was visible for them and changed their life. Democracy and human rights. Looking on the Afrobarometer, we can see, and it's positive, that Liberians are in favor of democracy. The majority, and the large majority, says yes, it's the best way of handling it. But at the same moment, they have a low trust in institutions, especially in their institutions. And they perceive a high level of corruption in the country. And that's also a risk for democracy. Sweden, again, has supported the main reforms. Really, the main ones like decentralization and land reform. We know from all countries where this happened, it's huge. It's also huge in a small country. You can draft it and it takes sometimes a decade to bring it through parliament. It happened for both. For both are through parliament. And in the same moment, we see, for example, land reform, that there's limited effect for local communities. Maybe only a handful of communities have already gained more land rights towards the government, while 100 of communities wait to achieve it. Again, there's a lot of resources for the authorities behind to handle these. So we see the same effect, a huge success on the national level, but a limited effect so far on the on the local level. Positive is the bottom-up approach we see toward gender equality. There we see a good way of handling how, on the one hand, on the local level something happened, but also on the national level with UN organizations. Since we run a bit out of time, I will go quite fast through inclusive economic development. There is a development. Some indicators become better, but again, the population don't perceive it is. A huge percentage of the support over this 20 years to one single project, 900 kilometers of feeder roads. These roads are there now at the moment, but again, it's on maintenance and also access for local communities, how they can use it. as a challenge. So the same thing, but we again see positive thing. There are now a lot of market approaches, how integrated ecosystems are created, who bring especially farmers and agricultural sector in a situation where they can use their products towards the market. And we see this as a new and really positive development. Let me close with some key lessons learned. Yes, Sweden has gained a huge influence in Liberia, and therefore this was only possible over being there for so many years and to react and to act with other donors together and stay with their issues, especially with these huge thematic areas you have chosen. Anyhow, the impact so far is mixed. Key success factors is a long time availability, present there, and to stick with your issues and to run the same things over years, but also to have a coherent strategy. We said some things can be better, but overall we would say there's a coherent idea how to work on issues for a long time and how to bring them together. As challenges, we see that it could be more balance between national initiatives and local communities. It should be more realistic towards the ambition that are behind. Don't start new projects when there's not secured how to sustain them after the initial phase. And there might be one missed opportunity. We talked to so many people, and we talked now about to focus, but one thing is missing out of the perspective of many people we talked to, that's education. We know education is core for development, but it was never part of the Swedish development cooperation strategy. And that might be one thing which is important for development and also quite soon visible to local communities and people if the education system become better. Now we are not in 20 minutes, but in 22 minutes we are done. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Christoph, I'll ask you to sit down with us here, and I'll ask also the panelists to come up. Gun Eriksson-Skog and Juliana Huss. Christoph, while they are sitting, were there any surprises to you in the role that Sweden played over this period?
Yes, maybe one out of the German perspective. We know that German portfolio creation and also steering is done centrally from Germany. And we were really surprised how close and how deep the embassy, especially Johan, was involved into creating the portfolio and steering it. So we were positively surprised. Okay. We saw it has an effect on a coherent portfolio, and that was a surprise and a learning point for us.
Great. So, Gun Eriksson-Skog, you are Senior Advisor for Trade and Market Development at SIDA. You worked in Liberia 2009 to 12 and were working hard on developing that program at that period. You've done a lot of other things and you have a PhD in economics and so on. Johan Romare with us online. Welcome. You're Head of Development Cooperation and also Deputy Head of the Mission at the Embassy there in Monrovia. Since 4 years and will soon move away from Monrovia, but you've been working in development for some 25 years with different hats on yourself. You have also been member of the reference group for this study, we should say, to be transparent. Juliana Huss, you are the project manager for Folke Bernadotte Academy, FBA, different from EBA, FBA. We work letter by letter here. You've been working also in Liberia previously for FBA, but also for the Office of the Resident Coordinator of UN for coordination there. You're all most welcome. And Johan, I'll start with you to ask a question. You follow the evaluation quite closely. What are your main takeaways from this evaluation? And are there any areas where you perhaps don't agree with the analysis or the conclusions? Please, Johan.
Thank you so much, Mats, and good afternoon to all of you. Maybe my first takeaway now is the reflection from my German colleague that the Swedish model of decentralization of power over portfolio shaping is an inspiration to Germany. That's of course very positive to hear. But aside from that, first of all, I would like to thank EBA and Suspons for the study. It is a very timely and will be one of the main entry points for the embassy when discussing a possible new strategy for Liberia the coming years. The evaluation confirms many of the reflections we have had here at the Swedish Embassy the last years, and gives a lot of food for thought for a new strategy for Liberia, but also for development cooperation more in general. There are, of course, methodological limitations, and I need to mention that, but they are well described in the report. So rather than to make some sort of an academic comment here, I would like to raise a few major learnings from reading the evaluation. So not only from the presentation, but from the rereading the evaluation yesterday evening. I made some comments that I would like to share with you. The breadth of the Swedish strategies, as mentioned, has given Sweden agency and a seat at the table at all key discussions with the government. And this should not be underestimated, as Sweden's political voice in Liberia reinforces what we can do in development cooperation and the other way around. Having said this, I also agree that it could be seen as a missed opportunity, not having entered substantially into the education sector, basic education sector. We are in the TVET. The human capital index is very low in Liberia, and this is a key challenge. I also agree with the recommendation to the Swedish policymakers, to the Swedish Parliament, to try to be more focused in their strategy formulation, to see the bigger picture, and to kill Swedish political party darlings when formulating strategies for Liberia or any other countries. However, we do not know if a sector focus on basic education would have given us an equally positive evaluation as the one we have at hand now. The education sector is supported by, for example, the World Bank, and that is partly through the Global Partnership for Education, where Sweden is one of the top donors, and USAID. And the results in the education sector are not obvious, to be honest. Quite the contrary, to give you the truth. Another major learning, I think, that we see from the report is that the financial sustainability aspect, was missed by the state builders and the peace builders who were maybe over-enthusiastic on the possibilities to solve all problems in Liberia after the war by policies, by buildings, by study visits, standing operating procedures, training manuals, international consultants. The lesson learned that the report shows, and which was known before, of course, is that Liberia needs to develop gradually with Liberian solutions led by Liberians, and always with an understanding that the costs for running the state needs to be borne by the state in the long run. And with an annual budget of around $700 million per year, the state can only do as much. And here, this is a big lesson learned. We overbuilt the state when we rebuilt the state, and there was absolutely no chance to have a financial sustainability for those ambitions. But, and I think this is an important but, even if the strategies were too broad, and even if there was a lack of sustainability in many of the state building ambitions, the main results remain, as Christoph has pointed out. The peace is sustained, and the democracy is robust. And this is a major, major success. And I quote you, Christoph, it is a success. And also maybe to mention that we know also that the political will in Liberia can, if it's at hand, can actually use a lot of these systems that have been built, where maybe the financial sustainability is not that costly for the government, but it's a matter of using the systems that are in place. And we see that now, when there has been a shift in government, that the government at hand now which has an ambition to go stronger on accountability, to fight corruption, are using the very same systems that were built up during these last 20 years, partly with Swedish funding, and they are usable to a low cost. It's a matter of political will. Maybe also to mention before my few minutes are over that the evaluation confirms that long-term engagement leads to change. Of course, not very surprising, but yet very important to underline. I would also like to then, in relation to that, to highlight the recommendation that was not mentioned in the presentation, but that I have taken note of. And that is to fail fast is important. And that there is a risk that Sweden has entered into what the evaluators call negative path dependence on specific partners and projects. And I like to combine these two reflections, that long-term engagement on issues, land reform, peace, decentralization. Sweden has, by sticking to these very important processes, shown that that commitment and that long-term engagement can lead to change. But also that when we do so, we need to acknowledge that we sometimes need to fail fast if the projects are not delivering, but stick to the issues. And I think that's a good combination of two reflections that the evaluators have shared with us. Of course, it's very rewarding to hear that the Swedish embassy and the Swedish overall efforts of coordination are acknowledged and appreciated. And this is, in my opinion, far more important than some of the internal coherence discussions that also the evaluators are discussing in the report. I think it is the coordination with other partners and with the government that's really where we can make a change. And this is where we should put the effort. And it's good to see that that has led to some results. There is a discussion in the report, which I also would like to highlight. It's on the mix of supporting the state and the civil society, communities, duty bearers, rights holders, duty bearers, top down, bottom up. And it seems like the evaluators see that gradually this mix has become better and there is a good coordination now. And I think we should take this even one step further. We should try to see, and we see in the current strategy, which is not part of the evaluation, that it is actually when the government, civil society, private sector, communities come together on issues and say, we have a joint ambition here, we can work together. That's when change comes about, not when we stick to the traditional idea of duty bearers and rights holders. And I think that is a good reflection in the evaluation also.
Thank you so much, Johan.
Yeah, I think I can stop there, maybe next. Thank you.
Do I understand you correctly that you think that the breadth of the program is not only a negative thing? You started out there. You saw some positive aspects of having a wide program as well. So could you see it in both ways?
Indeed.
Yeah. So as always, there's always a trade-off between things. Yeah. Juliana, I'd like to move on to you. You've been working in the peace and security, and are working in the peace and security sector, and that has been the underlying part of the program, as Christoph said from the start here. Now. Maybe you could say a few words about the way FBA works, but then also what do you see as the current challenges in this sector? Should we continue to work in the sector, and why, and what shall we do then in the sector right now? Something like that.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you for having me here today. So my name is Juliana, and I work with FBA, the Folke Bernadotte Academy, which is a sister agency to SIDA under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we do work under the same strategy, and have been working actively in Liberia under the development strategy since 2016. So the previous strategy and also the current one. Our focus is on peace and security and conflict prevention. But we're quite the different actor from SIDA. Firstly, we're much smaller in size. I think in the previous strategy we had around 30 million for the whole strategy period, while SIDA had around 1.350 billion. So quite much smaller. But we're also quite different in the sense how we operate. We are ourselves our implementing partners. So we fashion and create a capacity building support with Liberian partners in country directly. So that gives us quite a different outlook on how to work on the strategy. But what I found very interesting is that the evaluations that we have done in the previous strategy and also the current one on FBA interventions, both as a whole, the whole strategy, but also in certain interventions, is that we come across the same challenges as seen here in this report, and that is on the issue of sustainability. But also on the report here raises a lot on institutional change or the lack of institutional change results, but rather on more individual capacity strengthening. And also issues on coordination. So perhaps following what Johan said, and I very much agree with his points from the evaluation, I guess I have mainly two areas of questions that I found very interesting or thought-provoking when reading the report, and would very much like to hear what all the experts here in the room have to say about that. And the first one is you mentioned, and as well did Johan, on the issue of education, that perhaps Sweden should have focused more on that. And you put it very eloquently in the report when you said what to pursue at the expense of what. And that becomes a very interesting discussion, also moving forward with Liberia. But yes, perhaps education should have been part of the portfolio, but at the expense of what? And as Johan said, it is myriad of actors, both within Team Sweden, but also the international community in Liberia. So here is where the coordination with other donors and the UN has become very, very important in terms of you do this, and then we will add on with our support in this area. So I found that discussion very interesting in the report. And I guess the next question is about the overall results that we are expecting. The overall idea is that we tend to feel that we should have come further with total amount of X amount of dollars spent, but also X amount of years that has spent. But as you, Christoph, rightly pointed out, as a huge success, and also Johan, and that's where we come into my area of work, is that in terms of peace and security, it is a huge success that we have not relapsed into any sort of large-scale conflict or violence in Liberia, especially seeing that not the same path is perhaps equally apparent in the region, where we have quite more instability, let's say.
So should we stop talking about the post-conflict society, or are there challenges remaining?
There's absolutely, I would say, a vast amount of challenges remaining within the sector. Whether or not to identify it as post-conflict or not, that's a very long discussion. I think it has also had a lot of political implications, I think. But the challenges within the peace and security sector in Liberia and also in the reconciliation agenda are huge. Like I said, we see successful aspect in terms of no large-scale conflict and violence, but it's a very fragile country, I would say. Many of the challenges that could be seen as the causes for the war are still intact and are still a large challenge in Liberia today. The marginalization between the state and the regional areas are a large area for concern moving forward in terms of increased areas of conflict. access to justice, like as mentioned. Liberia's challenges does not only pertain providing basic services, but also basic services in terms of justice and the security sector for its people.
So Christoph was mentioning that as well in his presentation.
Yeah.
That there are fragility, there are risks remaining.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's all, I say it's all relative. We've seen very successful elections, relatively peaceful, but there's still a vast amount of issues that has not been taken care of, or that we need to continue focus on moving forward in order to not go back to where we have been in the past.
So shall we move over to another sector, maybe?
Yes.
In the interest of time, sorry. Gun, you've been working then with market development.
Yes.
And I know that you're very engaged and sort of...
I am.
on that. But why was market development so important?
Yes, thank you very much for the question and for having me here. And thanks to the evaluators for the presentation, and in particular for the report. I must say I'm very fond of the report. I find it, you don't give it justice fully here because it's so rich and well written and very interesting. And I agree with most conclusions, I must say, and the issues that have been discussed here. But there are really a lot of insights, so it's good digging into it, I think. It's also very much a personal pleasure. You know, it's so rewarding to get the chance to go back. I worked in Liberia between 2009 and 2012, and we were setting up the embassy, we were setting up the portfolios, and it was a struggle in many ways. But to be reminded of what we did and how we were thinking, and also getting the opportunity to look back upon that in the perspective of time and from an outsider's, I find that very stimulating. So it's the report is extremely thought-provoking in a good way, I think. I think you capture a lot of the essence of the issues that you study. So I would also like to particularly emphasize what I appreciate much, and that's also thanks to the EBA, and that is the focus on sustainability. And I think we can come back maybe to that a little bit.
We will come back
yes.
to sustainability,
Yes.
but why is...
yeah, I'm coming now to the situation. When we came down there after the 6 years after the peace accord, it was an extremely challenging situation. And I'm mentioning this because this often applies in post-conflict and fragile contexts. So it's something we recognize. Not only was there tremendous devastation and so on, there was virtually no data, no information, for instance, about the economy. What we were going to support and why. And everything was, of course, needed, but also very few development actors in place, mainly humanitarian actors and UN organizations adopting humanitarian approaches. Very few programs to support. So, and I want to emphasize this particular challenge, and that was sort of the remaining and strong humanitarian relief perspective and a sort of spirit of handing out support to recipients. And that was particularly challenging for economic development, notably in agriculture. Because the handout of farm inputs for free all over the place, which continued for years, even several years later, I don't know about that, that undermined very much opportunities for private providers of seeds, other inputs and so on, and sort of and made it difficult for the emergence of markets for farm inputs, for example. So that I think is it's important to recognize that you can and should, in my opinion, start with long-term economic development early on. Mm-hmm. So how are we going to go about? Well, we needed to understand what kind of economy this was. and sort of put pieces together to try to get a picture of what it was. What we saw was that there was an underlying problem, which is really the split society of Liberia between a huge gap which from state formation between the descendants of the freed slaves, which became the elite or the new masters, if you like, and the indigenous population, the vast majority of the people. And that had implications for the economy and for the economic structure, because it was also a split economy. On the one hand, there was the concession-based economy, or maybe plantation-based, which benefited the few, the elite, and which was also the main source of income for the government. And then there was the rest of the economy, which was not very much developed at all, very little economic activity for the majority of the population who lived in deep poverty, in subsistence, agriculture,
so what
forestry.
you're saying is that this related to the peace process?
That's what we thought. We saw that connection, that there is a fundamental split in society, and that was not the immediate cause for the conflicts as they emerged, but that's a fundamental source of conflict that lingers. I don't think it's solved today, but it's there. And the economy was split. So it was very important to sort of get these pieces together on the economic side. What would that imply? Well, it had to imply to develop the rest of the economy that was not the plantation economy. The plantation or concession-based economy is very much like a brukssamhälle. These concessions were responsible for all physical and social infrastructure in their domains, like roads and schools and hospitals. So it was very much an outsourcing of these functions to the private sector. This can have many implications we cannot discuss now, but
I think we need to move on.
We move on, and so what we did, we decided we needed to develop this economy on which most people depended, which was obviously agriculture. Yes. And so we started to build up, it needed to include them, to build up a portfolio. It largely focused initially on creating an enabling environment for business, or, not least in agriculture and SMEs. So the feeder, let me say, that enabling environment we felt was not enough to get things started. We needed to complement that with economic activity on the ground. Working with market actors in agriculture, developing markets, along the value chains, and so on. And that's sort of what we complement.
And now I'd like to move to Christoph, because you've heard three of them here with different perspectives. But coming together, did it work, putting this economic growth sector together with other sectors in the program? What's your take? And if you also could answer this question that came on education, shouldn't that have been sort of spreading us too thinly and going away from something?
Yeah. We always like to work in a pyramid. What's the main achievement we would like to reach? So, we see if we start with peace, we need, on the one hand, prevention for the outbreak of new conflicts. On the other hand, we need not new reforms, but we need actions that are visible for the people. And that might be this economic development, which is really well to combine with other things. So if you build a feeder road somewhere, you build economic infrastructure around, not another part of the country. So make it an integrated ecosystem which can work together. And in this system, also education can work. Do not see it as a new isolated pillar, but bring it together to bring basic education in areas where you work on economic development. And sure, if there are other projects, the other discussion we had, donor coordination is core. If you have another partner who's working already on basic education, do not double up it. But we see what there was one main response, and a loud response we got, that there's too little done on basic education in Liberia through the donors at all in total. So that was one idea which we can present, care about, not maybe by doing it yourself, but by bringing in supporting initiatives who work on basic education and combine it with economic development, with infrastructure, under the pyramid of securing peace by making progress visible to the people.
So it's a challenge remaining to all of us and all other donors. And you'd like to comment on that one? Please.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think this is a really interesting discussion. I just want to mention that a reflection I have when I'm reading the report, the evaluation, and maybe this is something for EBA to reflect on also, is that Susponse has done the job. They have looked into the Swedish portfolio, the coherence in the Swedish portfolio. And that's where there is this discussion on the feeder roads, as Christoph mentioned, and why didn't we bring other projects in the Swedish portfolio in the same geographic proximity as the feeder roads? Something, I mean, we are doing now, and that can be done, so that's not a bad recommendation. But I think the problem here is that the feeder roads that Sweden decided to support, they are part of a national road development plan. And that national road development plan is linked to agriculture efforts from the government, from their extension services. These are corridors of development that the government has identified. The World Bank, African Development Bank, other partners are coming in with other support. So maybe a problem with the report, the evaluation, is that it's over-focusing on the Swedish coherence and the Swedish portfolio, but not having been able, because they were not asked to look into the broader picture. And then you discuss coordination as a separate issue. But here, I think for EBA to reflect on, if you want to look at a longitude like this, maybe it would have been valuable to see the larger effort from the government together with all development partners. And there you would find, for example, that the feeder roads are not in isolation at all. So just a comment on the reflection that is quite eminent in this report, and maybe it could have been discussed from another angle. Thank you.
Passing to us at EBA rather than to Susponse, I think. We take it. But I'd like us to discuss a really difficult area, sustainability. You know, that is always something that comes back as any donor. There are achievements made. We've heard that. Good results overall. Yes, however, you're also right. Overall, the sustainability of projects remains low. And I'll ask you, Johan, because the evaluators, Christoph and Julian here, they argue that you need a coherent and complementary portfolio to achieve sustainability. You should not only look at each intervention in isolation. And you just talked about that. But how to prioritize then? Can we balance between the sectors to be better at sustainability? Should we work more with sequencing of different interventions, or are there any tricks to do this, to build this thing? Gunni is eager to jump in, but if you have any thoughts, Johan, I give you the first go.
Yeah, I have a reflection on this. This is something we discuss a lot here, and it's something we have brought into the current portfolio discussion. And when we discuss a new possible support, the financial sustainability and sustainability is very much at the heart of that initial discussion. And I think we now, if I then also take this opportunity to look into the coming support from Sweden to Liberia, and I do want to call this a development context and not a post-conflict context. And I think that discussion will have to take very clearly its point of departure on the fact that I mentioned that Liberia has a state budget of $700 million annually to spend on education, health, roads, other services. And whatever we do in our coming support to Liberia has to take that into account. And we have to do, as they say here in Liberia, we have to work small. We take gradual changes. And I think this over enthusiasm that marked the post-conflict period of trying to leapfrog Liberia out of where it was before the war to something that could have been an ideal state was not sustainable financially. And now we need to say, okay, and we need to speak to the government. We say, you have $700 million to develop your country. We have some additional funding to that, but it can never be to for 10, 20, 30 years sustain the support we give. So what can we do just additionally? But the point of departure has to be, how can Liberia deliver democracy, have a democracy that delivers with a state budget of $700 million? And the answer, of course, is focus now on sustainable economic growth, which is Gun's area. This is the focus of the coming years. This is what can transform Liberia, to get the economy growing, get a wider tax base, and by that, helping the government to deliver what the government has to deliver, but based on a Liberian economy, not an economy that is unrealistic, not least since we know that ODA will go down, not up.
But this concept of post-conflict, I think it's a label, it's something, we might mean different things with it. You say it's a small approach that could be seen as the alternative to a larger scale, more ambitious surges, as in a post-conflict setting where a lot of donors move in. But Juliana, I'd like to ask you about this concept of post-conflict before I leave the word to Gun. Do you think the same way as Johan does on this? We should see it as a development situation now, rather than a post-conflict. You talked about the risks that exist still with re-emergence of conflicts.
Yes, so my caution to only referring to Liberia as a development context would be to lose focus and lose the light on the issues that I mentioned earlier on peace and security issues. Having that, it all depends on what you put under that title and what you mean when you discuss a post-conflict setting. But it does come with certain political light. It does, for Liberia's case, it does come with certain international attention on peace and security issues, on conflict prevention, on reconciliation agenda, to perhaps still have Liberia under the as part of the Liberia Peace Building Fund.
Within the UN, yeah.
Within the UN, yes.
Yeah.
So and we also have to listen to what Liberians are saying. In many aspects, or the areas and partners we are working with, Liberians themselves are hesitant to lose this title and lose this appetite, and we have to be mindful that we are there to support them. But I absolutely agree with you on that. In terms of perhaps the broader spectrum, we are now at a stage in Liberia where we're not talking about direct post-conflict reconstruction, but this challenging and artful balancing act on focusing on development and development issues moving forward, but also not losing the eye on the importance of, we still have so much to do in terms of peace and security and maintaining that in Liberia.
Oh yeah, so there are many tasks to work on. Gun, I interrupted you.
No problem whatsoever. I would like to agree with you that it doesn't matter if it's called post-conflict or not. I mean, development has to start as soon as it's possible, and it may be complemented by shorter-term interventions as long as they don't prevent long-term development. But we will always need to be conflict aware as a minimum in whatever we do. But I would like to pick up on what Johan said. I think it was, I believe that without economic development that generates resources to the government for it performing its function, there can never be peace or development. But it's also necessary to hold the state to account, and you discussed that quite a lot. So you can't only work with state building as a capacity issue. State develops in interaction with society. So you work with civil society, you work with private sector, and so on. It's through that interaction so that is a sustainability issue in itself. But you also raised some other things. The funding, of course, as we have discussed. And the lack of exit strategies in particular projects. What does that mean? Well, that means that you have to design a clear exit strategy already from the start of setting up an interventions. How will phase out and local takeover happen? And you must have realistic assumptions about what the takeover can look like. So you have to ask yourself, sort of, what vision do we have of sort of who will do and fund this in the future? If it's government, civil society, or private sector activity, it must be realistic, and there must be actors who are able and willing to do that. And it's not only about capacity, regardless of what sector we talk about. It's about incentives, and we often tend to forget the importance of incentives.
But Gun,
yes.
We are economists. We love the word incentives.
We do.
And we say it very often.
Yes.
How can we understand what incentives we create?
We have to be aware. It's not us who shall create incentives for local actors, because then we only buy development. No, we have to help actors to see that there are incentives for development already in society. And how do we do that? In the private sector, we help actors to maybe link to each other and see that here is a growth potential in this sector. Here is a profitability potential. We shall not create their incentives. We can facilitate change driven by local actors who have incentives, but we can help them to see those incentives, and say we can help them to drive change in the context for economic activity.
Great.
Then incentives will be strengthened.
Okay, Juliana, you wanted to come in on a point
just perhaps to circle back on what Johan mentioned about the budget and the capacity of Liberia and in terms of sustainability. I was very proud to read in the findings in the reports that there was such strong coherence with Swedish support in line with Liberian priorities, and I think that is key moving forward, and also key in terms of sustainability and what we're doing. But it also needs to be, like Johan said, some sort of realism in terms of what capacity the state or your partners in-house have. And from our end, and I think from FBA's perspective, when developing our portfolio, and I think we see that in the report for Sweden as a whole, the way that we have moved forward, or our thought process around this, is that we have been working on different levels. We have been working with the state on the same issue as we have been working on the ground with civil society. We've been working on the actual structures, and so forth. So it's a combination and a balanced set of activities or support concerning the same challenge. And I think that's a key moving forward to the next strategy that we have seen as a successful way forward. But also in terms of risk, I think the report also mentioned that Sweden did see it as a risk in terms of sustainability. Would the Liberian government be able to take on and fully continue with the support made? And that is a real risk that we have to take. And in some areas, it's a risk worth taking. So that's, I think,
Okay.
something
Good.
that we do.
No, I think this working on different levels is something you discuss a lot, and how they can complement one another, and the different examples of that I think is quite important. And I think there is scope for improvement of having sort of more coherent, and how shall I say, portfolios where interventions are complementary. Of course, other actors also complement, but anyway, because then you can have a more comprehensive support in one area. And this is actually already taking place in the market systems development programs. And that approach sort of looks at, I think we can learn a lot, both about sustainability, because that approach is aimed and designed to promote sustainability and impact, large-scale impact, by changing market systems, the way systems function, and looking at the different actors along a value chain, and also the conditions created in the context, and working with several of those at the same time.
And this coordination issue brings us also to the issue of coordination. You have been working in Monrovia at the UN Center. How would you describe the atmosphere or the potential for coordination among donors in Monrovia at the time?
That was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago.
I think Johan absolutely, and the other people from the embassy are much better suited.
I wanted to ask you after this, but
I was at the time I was working on the UN coordination. I think there's still about 19 UN agencies in country with vast different programming, and it's absolutely a challenge, to say the least. And there's different aspects of coordination. It's within the Swedish team itself, it's within bilateral partners, it's with the government of Liberia, which is, I guess, the main focus for coordination. So there's different layers of those challenges.
So Johan, how do you deal with that challenge, all the UN organizations?
Well, I mean, the UN organizations and the One UN and the UN reform, of course, maybe that's another seminar in itself. But I think we are trying from the Swedish side, both me and our ambassador here, our Ambassador Sjöström, we are working quite hard in a dialogue with the UN here, and the RC, the resident coordinator, and the heads of the key agencies on seeing a one UN and one approach, a strategic approach. And I think that is manifested now when we from the embassy have been quite in the driver's seat of supporting the new government in developing a national development plan with the government in the driver's seat. We are co-funding this from the Swedish embassy here to ensure that it's a consultative process nationwide. And we have also been quite instrumental in putting in place a joint point of departure, a study that's called Drivers of Inclusive and Sustainable Development, where there are some entry points for the government to reflect on how to create transformative change and how to prioritize among priorities. And I think this goes together with our support to the UN to then come as one UN supporting one government on this ambition. And I'm happy to see that the evaluation reflects that this work that Sweden has been engaged in for many years is leading to some results. But I have to say we are quite lonely in this. Sweden is one of the few voices still there for development effectiveness and for the issues that are close to the Swedish understanding on how change comes about. And but it's good to see that it's working here in Liberia, and we are quite hopeful for having a good countrywide consultation that leads to a national development plan that we can then all contribute to with bigger or smaller contributions from the development partners. So, and that's the UN is involved in that.
We now have questions from the room here. We might have questions online. I know your names, but in the interest of not prioritizing anyone, I'm calling on the man in glasses down there who can introduce himself.
Okay, my name is Lennart Wolgemot. I'm a former aid worker.
If you move a bit, then I think the camera to the side. So.
I've been involved quite a lot in Liberia for a very long time, actually before the first projects in the 60s and 70s. But I also participated when the first strategy meeting was on in 2003. And it was to the least, it was a confused meeting, and I'm extremely impressed with what I now have read in this report, and particularly what I've heard from directly from the embassy. And I think there is one point which we now was discussing, which is missing a little in the report, because what has been done is not only that there has been a coherent strategy, or 3 strategies worked out during the period, and you have talked a lot about that, but also that SIDA and the embassy has taken a role. First, we talked about coordination with the other donors. Then we talked about how to work with the UN and pressing UN on normative issues.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, I mean, also taking the initiative now when it comes to working on a plan for the future. I think this is very impressive, what has been done in this short period, from the confusion 20 years ago.
Can you formulate that as a question to the panel?
The question is that I think that this is missing, partly missing in the report.
So is it missing? That's the question. Okay. A gentleman up here in blue shirt, please. The microphone is coming. Introduce yourself and ask the question to
I'm Stefan Dahlgren, like the previous speaker, an old aid worker. I have 2 questions, actually a little bit narrow. Is more about the evaluation as such. This is this evaluation is mainly interesting, of course, for Sweden as a donor. But the question, my question is more: did you find any interest from particularly the government and other actors for what you are doing? Were doing when working with this evaluation, and what would you say would be the potential usefulness for other actors of the evaluation? I also, my second question is a little bit related to this. What would you say is the particularly kind of special features with this evaluation compared to, in your previous experience, to other kinds of similar, say, national program evaluations? What makes it a little bit special, perhaps useful for other actors in Sweden? Thank you.
Thank you. And a question from the woman in...
The woman, half old aid worker. My name is Lena Johansson de Chateau, and I'm head of evaluation at SIDA. So I, as an evaluator, I would like to narrow down even more on the evaluatory aspect of this report. But thank you so much first for a very solid evaluation, which I haven't read. So my questions now are just from what you presented, okay? So you have evaluated 3 strategies and 3 thematic areas over a very long time, and we understand from the presentations that there were challenges, of course, in evaluation design and method and so on. And I read from the report that you have been applying contribution analysis approach. So I'm interested to know, my main question actually, to just shortcut it, is what you yourself would say is the main methodological advancement or contribution of this particular evaluation. Because you have been solving many evaluatory methodological challenges, I'm sure. So what would you see as your main contribution? And then also a bit in relation to what Stefan said, when your conclusion about the Swedish support's impact, or the Swedish impact being mixed, that's of course to be expected in this kind of context. So did you at all do any benchmarking with regard to other donors who maybe have evaluated their country program support over time to Liberia? Thank you.
Thank you. We take another question before we get the answers, and down there, please.
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you for an excellent presentation. My name is Anna Rambe, and I'm a Senior International Program Manager at RFSU. And from our perspective, Liberia is a super interesting case. We are together with the embassy supporting civil society on improving access to sexual and reproductive health and rights through the ecosystem of the Liberian civil society. And we see that the embassy in Liberia has been hugely important in its gender equality / feminist normative leadership, and also in the thematic focus of some of the interventions that the embassy has supported. So we, or at least I am, together with my colleague Wilson here, I think, we are interested if that is something that you also looked at, whether you see any outcome, any impact of that normative leadership and also thematic priority, because we know that Liberia, coming from you mentioned the Human Development Index, so poverty-ridden, also with the legacy of conflict, enormously high levels of sexual and gender-based violence and inequality in society. We know that SRHR is important for achieving development in society. So that was my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have a host of questions to share and to take care of in the panel. Sweden's role, did you do anything on that? I think that's a Christopher question. The interest in the MFA of your evaluation, that's also Christopher. A lot, actually, towards you. Also the more evaluative questions.
You can take some of them.
No.
So,
but I have a sidekick with me.
So we start with you, Christoph, and the others will support you as we go. Please.
It's a lot about evaluation methods. Maybe I start with this one. That was a special evaluation for us as well. So there are not so many evaluations to be done which are so broad. And to look on the country, not on a specific intervention or sector, but on the whole country, what the portfolio is there, and then for 20 years. So put both together, and this is really interesting. It's a lot of discussion in how to do it, and we had a much broader idea how to do it, the evaluation, as we've done in the end. We did some counterfactual designs we had proposed, but the challenges are then what is resources, how to pick out of hundreds of projects the right case studies, and how to balance between projects which are just running or have been closed down 15 years ago, how to get contact, how to get a grip on them. And we discussed a lot we had about 10 case studies, 10 projects, and we did a lot of other things. We did a lot of interviews with former beneficiaries and now the actual beneficiaries, with project officers, with other agencies. So that's how we included other perspectives. We have not analyzed deeply what other countries are doing. Some of the portfolio, what issues they are in, but we discuss with them how do they perceive Sweden and how do they perceive that it fits to their own strategy. So we did a lot of data collection in the country, but also through modern techniques and online survey we did. We performed out, and then we decided for a quite classic approach, a contribution analysis. So for the ones who are not doing evaluation, it's the idea that there are no causal things. I do the one thing, I take a medicine, and then I'm healthy again. It's much more diverse how impacts are created. So we look what contribution and a federal takes to the development of Liberia, for example. That was challenging in the beginning, but then we saw that that we found the same mechanism in different areas. Then it became somehow easy, or because that's maybe also a speciality of our evaluations. We are not sector experts. We come in with process expertise. What do we need in coordination, in programming, in steering, and strategy things? And we saw that the same challenges have been all over Liberia and over all 3 periods, but with an improvement. So we saw that the last strategy was much more focused on sustainability than the first one. Sustainability was not in the beginning. We have not found the word or the meaning behind. So it was just we have to do something, as you said. We have to start.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, but I agree. One unusual feature of this evaluation is the strong focus on sustainability. And you really looked at it and analyzed it, and when has it worked better and why, and so on. So I think this is an important contribution apart from the broader perspective that you take in many different ways.
I think the questions of Anna and Lennart are a bit similar. The role of Sweden as a sort of leader on the national scene. Maybe Johan, is that a question that you could reflect on a bit?
Absolutely. I think this is what I was mentioning in my overall reflection, that the breadth of the strategies that we have implemented and are implementing has given Sweden a very prominent role in Liberia in almost every issue that is discussed. And this has given us the opportunity. We are invited to all discussions. We are expected to come to all discussions. We also have a convening role, and this gives us the opportunity to really work as an integrated embassy. For those of you who understand what I mean with that the political side of the embassy, the ambassador, and the development cooperation side of the embassy, led by my team, we can come together and we can use this extremely key role that Sweden has in Liberia as the second largest bilateral donor after the USAID for normative discussions, also in areas that we might not have any direct contributions. And I think this should not be underestimated, as I said in the beginning. Sweden has been influential in Liberia beyond our funding to development cooperation programs because of that political voice we have and are expected to play. And I think the evaluation, as far as I read it, maybe with my own glasses, says that we're using that opportunity in a fairly good way, and that makes me very happy. Thanks.
Julian would like to add something also.
I can take a couple of questions.
Yes.
That are still remaining.
Okay. Juliana is ready to talk as well. So please.
No, I just wanted to maybe give a comment on the Swedish identity or renommee as a whole. Not only is it remarkable to see the success that Sweden has and the voice that the embassy has in the areas that Johan mentioned, but as you travel throughout Liberia and speak to Liberian people, how incredibly positive attitudes they have towards Sweden, starting from the history that Sweden has in the 50s, 60s with the missionaries. And I meet Lamco also, absolutely, building hospitals and roads. I meet people that are in their 40s, 50s now that are called Sven or other Swedish names because the missionaries had such a big impact. So Sweden is very much beloved, and it's amazing that we've been able to sustain that throughout this whole time, and it's very much thanks to SIDA and the embassy on the ground, I think.
A lot of praise. Julian, you had some answers as well to questions.
Maybe regarding the interest from the government and the other actors. So we've generally received quite a lot of interest in being interviewed. So we didn't have problems in finding interviewees. With the focus of the evaluation being on Sweden and being on Swedish development cooperation, we're not so sure about the interest in the kind of results of the evaluation. So I think many people that we've talked to, they were interested in giving the perspective and in thanking Sweden, but also in presenting the challenge that they were still facing. But the focus is then on another level, which then focuses very much on Sweden. So not so sure whether they'd be interested in the actual results. Speaking about the benchmarking, which I think is an interesting evaluation question always, and we often get asked, can we compare ourselves to others, or can we compare different things? And it's quite difficult. And so we didn't do it because what would be the benchmark? So do we compare them to the US that has a completely different system, has a completely different way of working, has maybe worked in different sectors as well? Do we compare to smaller donors, to bigger donors, to the UN? So what we rather do is we look at what are the Swedish ambitions? Were they realistic and were they being fulfilled? And what are then missed opportunities and what are also used opportunities? And that's kind of the benchmarking that we do, and looking more at kind of the procedural level of what are the ambitions, and have at each step of the way people used opportunities and used analysis to reach those opportunities. Last question, just because the gender equality and the SGBV, which I think takes a bigger room in the report than we were able to do today in the presentation. We saw quite a lot of leadership by the Swedish Embassy, and I think there's two issues. One is the access to justice for issues of SGBV, and then gender equality more general. And in both aspects, we saw quite a big contribution by Sweden, by building specialized courts, by supporting Liberia to reform that part of the justice as well. So that, and then also work with more civil society and gender equality. So quite a lot there, which we weren't able to go into detail today.
So now I'm winding up.
Yes.
I give the panel 10 seconds each to say one word if you have any, or you can jump it. So, I'm thanking you all for coming and contributing to the discussion. There will always be more EBA seminars to participate in and listen to. On Thursday, we'll have a webinar online on local actors in humanitarian aid. When the summer is over, there will be seminars on issues like transparency of Swedish aid, Swedish climate aid, constitution building processes, anti-corruption, etc. So watch out at our website and sign up for our newsletter to stay informed about all these events coming. And you can also look at www.eba.se, where you can listen to our podcasts on various subjects. So thank you all for contributing.
Thank you.
The panel,
Thank you.
big hand. And thank you, Johan.